Well, if you look at the fixed deals, there are now about 10 sub-1,000 deals. That's a huge fall. Caroline quoted 1,300. I tell people out there, if they go on the Best Buy tables, if they look at the independent suppliers, they can get plenty of deals less than £1,000.
OK, let me bring in Roger Helmer.
This is typical of the old party politicians. Prices have risen as a direct result of their policy decisions, and instead of fessing up to it, what they are doing is they're trying to blame the utility companies. And I would say to Ed, the whole justification for his very expensive renewables was that fossil fuel prices could only go up. That was the story, and they may not be, renewables may not be competitive today, but they will be competitive in future years. What we have actually seen is coal prices, gas prices, oil prices down.
Offshore wind prices down.
Just before I come to...
They're not competitive.
Let me ask you this, Roger Helmer, just before I come to Andrew Sparrow here, Andrew Cooper, sorry. You complain about subsidies for renewables, and you say that that's put the cost up.
Yes.
But you fuel your own home with solar power, and you boast of making money out of it as well.
Indeed.
You thought it was a very good return from the taxpayer.
Well, I believe that if people offer you free money, you should take it. I've got no complaints against those farmers who put wind farms on their land in order to get the subsidies. What I object to is the politicians who created those structures to start with.
So it's wrong, but you take advantage of it.
What's shocking about that, Ed? That's perfectly straightforward. If you're offered free money, you take it.
Let me come to Andrew Cooper.
No, I didn't say you shouldn't take the money. What I said was that you shouldn't have the policy. That's just not true, Ed. You've just told a lie on air.
Andrew Cooper, you would take us to an entirely fossil-free and nuclear-free electricity generation, correct?
Correct.
We would be overwhelmingly dependent on renewables, particularly wind power.
Certainly. Not just there's lots of renewables. Yeah, certainly.
What would happen when the wind doesn't blow?
Well, one of the great things we have is the national grid, which and the wind is usually blowing at some part of the country, but it's not the only form.
Well,
it's not the only form of renewable energy there is. There is solar, there is biomass, there is there's geothermal energy. There's a lot of
our overwhelming renewable alternative is wind power.
But that's one of the great things. We want to invest more in renewable technologies such as hydro, such as wind, wave. We're putting more money into research and development.
We've pretty much reached the limit of hydro in this country.
Not in terms of wind and wave.
There's a lot more
in wind and wave.
Tidal lagoon power is very exciting. That's why I put
one of the 3 times the cost of real.
Roger. So really, it's actually getting a good mix. I mean, one of the great things about renewable energy is there are lots of different forms of it, and that's a great thing we can do.
Let's just stick on wind for a moment. Matthew Hancock, you say, your party says that you're going to go for the most rational forms of energy and you want clean renewable energy. Yet you have turned your back on onshore wind, which is by far the cheapest form of readily available renewable energy. And people are baffled by this. I mean, energy experts have called it idiotic.
Hydro is cheap.
No, well, they're wrong.
I said readily
there's a couple of things in that. The first is that the latest auctions showed that solar was in fact the cheapest form of renewables, and that's great, and I think the expansion of solar is superb. But there's a broader...
That's been superseded. That's changed because the solar firms have pulled out because they can't compete.
No, even those that haven't pulled out. But there's a broader point also, which is that we have to tackle carbon emissions, but we have to do it in a way that doesn't cost the Earth and also doesn't destroy our natural environment. Environmental policy, yes, is about carbon emissions, but it's also about the beauty of our green and pleasant land, and putting onshore turbines in the wrong places where they're not wanted is not acceptable to local communities, and we need to tackle that, whilst also supporting other renewable and low carbon. For instance, new nuclear is a low carbon source of energy. I can't understand why the Greens say they're in favour of new nuclear, but I've got a question for Caroline, which is that the SNP are against new nuclear, so would you have that as a red line, that you will back new nuclear even if Nicola Sturgeon tells you not to?
Matt, I'm not going to take any lectures from you on that, because when the last Labour government made the decision, particularly because of the development of our climate change policy, that we felt nuclear had to be part of the mix going forward, I think it seems to recall that David Cameron said it should be a last resort, and Liberal Democrats, including Ed Davey, were absolutely against it. So we're very clear. Nuclear power is part of our mix of energy for the future, and we've been totally
Okay.
100% behind. But can I ask Matt a question?
No, you can't, because you've had more good enough. Let me come to Ed Davey.
We don't have to rule it out because it's actually our policy to have it.
There's no point having sidebar discussions. Nobody can hear you. Ed Davey, let me pick up the point that Caroline Flint just made there. In 2010, your manifesto flatly rejected nuclear power. Now you're building the most expensive nuclear power station ever, and you want to build more. I mean, isn't it true that you're just as trustworthy on energy as you were on tuition fees?
Listen, we did change our position and publicly did that, but I don't regret that simply because...
So you were wrong?
Simply because of the risks of climate change coming into power, seeing how much green electricity we need to replace fossil fuel plants, coal plants, gas plants, to replace the nuclear power plants that are ageing. 8 out of 9 nuclear power plants are closing by the middle of the next decade.
You must have known all that in 2006. In 2006, you said no to nuclear power, even though you knew that the fossil fuel plants would have to close. You said no to nuclear power.
That's true. I've completely admitted that. But we also looked at the numbers when we came into government. And the numbers of green electricity you need actually really surprised me, because not only do you have to do that on the electricity side, but you're going to need green electricity for the heat, for the transport. So I think people out there don't understand how much, and I don't think I did, how much green electricity we're going to need in the future. And wind can do that, solar can do that, tidal can do that. But nuclear has a role to play in a balanced mixed approach.
What's the answer to... What's your view on that? Because you're against...
Well,
surely if you want to decarbonise the economy, nuclear power, along with renewables, has a major role to play.
But there's a choice.
Greens think that. Greens with a small g.
Well, yeah, but there's a choice here. It's going to cost consumers £24 billion for the Hinkley C plant. And as we've heard, those costs could rise enormously. And most of that work is actually going to go to French and Chinese companies. And that money would be much better spent in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of renewables. And of course, we've never... We have not...
Well. It's not either
Of course.
All right.
Of course, one of the...
Well, you've all mentioned energy efficiency. Let me bring in the expert on that, Roger.
Matthew Hancock, another question for you, if I may. You have insulated 5 million homes this Parliament. Experts say energy efficiency is by far the best solution to energy problems. It means fewer emissions, warmer homes, lower bills, and fewer power stations you need to build. Next time round, you're planning to build to insulate 1 million homes. And along these terms, it could take 300 years before the UK's homes are properly insulated. And that's baffling a lot of people.
Why are you not doing more?
Well, let me split out those two figures, because an awful lot of energy efficiency measures are paid for and happen completely independently of government, especially because you can bring down your energy bills by putting in energy efficiency measures. You can bring down bills and pay for it up front yourself. And huge numbers, millions of people do that, and that's very sensible. The 1 million in the manifesto is the commitment to support 1 million people who can't afford to do that themselves and help that to happen so that everybody can benefit from these efficiency measures.
We showed in the coalition that you could do be far more ambitious on energy efficiency. As Roger said, we managed to do 5 million homes, 1 million homes ahead of our target in the last 2 years, really achieving. And Liberal Democrats are very ambitious on energy efficiency. We want a Green Buildings Act to massively increase our targets. Because you're right, it is the best way. And I cannot understand why the Tories have turned their back on this, because it's the cheapest form of energy efficiency.
This is a classic case of talking the talk but not walking the walk.
It's in our manifesto.
It might be in your manifesto.
And it's our record. We've actually done it.
It might be in your
record. We've actually done it.
All right.
It might be in your manifesto, but it's certainly not in your record. You've had huge cuts to the energy company obligation. You've had huge cuts to insulation programme. There are hundreds of thousands of homes of fuel-poor people who are not going to be insulated because your government cut the energy company obligation. You were the ones who did that. Don't try and wriggle out of it.
Let me answer that directly. That's a very serious accusation. Let me
answer it.
We had a debate in government about the future of the energy company obligation. The Tories wanted to cut it to try to take £50 off bills, and we actually worked very well to do that. But I put a line in the sand. I said that part of the energy company obligation that helped the fuel poor would not be cut, and it was not cut.
That is
we succeeded.
I want people to come to their minds. I want just to move on.
No.
This is
because some of the money in the other parts of the energy company obligation was
relevant to cost.
All right, this is relevant to cost, and I want to ask Caroline just quick questions for a couple of you. It was the last Labour government, Caroline Flint, that brought in the green levies. They're now about £115 added on to the average household bill.
That's insulation as well as renewable
There's no mention of green levies in the Labour manifesto this year. Why not? And how much will they go up by?
Well, we'll continue to support the development of renewables, but you'll forgive me if when we look in government we see how much we want to do on that. Likewise,
will the levies go up?
Likewise, what we have said is on energy efficiency is we think there's a better way to actually spend the money that's already there.
Will the levies go up?
Look, the issue around the levies are determined by what we're putting into the sector. What we want to do is make... Well, let's just remember something. On the green levies, it's £60 of the average bill of £1,300. Now, the truth is, why we have gone so hard on the issues around the energy companies, the big six, and how they operate, is to make sure that they tackle the side of the bill that they're responsible, that they're not passing on to customers. So it is important to get this balance right. But
Matthew Hancock. Tories want to go all out for shale. These are your party's words. And you mentioned Britain's green and pleasant land. So would you welcome energy firms seeking permission for fracking in one of your own constituency beauty spots like East Town Park or Newton Park?
Well, as it happens, there isn't any shale gas in that particular part of the country. But I've been very clear...
Would you welcome it in your own constituency if it was a beauty spot?
I'd be open to having shale gas in any part of the country, so long as it is explored for in a way that is careful and cautious and with a deep respect for the natural environment. In fact, hold on. In fact, the first thing that I did as Energy Minister was bring in a rule to say that you couldn't have shale gas exploration within national parks. So I think this is important. I think it's important that we do this, but we've got to do it carefully and cautiously.
The science says that the shale gas should remain in the ground. The 4/5 of known hydrocarbons, the 4/5 of hydrocarbon reserves, the 4/5 of hydrocarbon reserves should be kept there.
I'd rather
have
gas from the UK than from Russia or from Qatar.
The problem is that we've actually wasted some valuable time in the last 4 years because we do use a lot of gas. I think it's 80% of our heating, and therefore we're going to rely on gas for some time to come. Now, our position has been is that we haven't set our face against it, but where this whole debate has gone wrong is, unfortunately, the government have been incredibly gun-ho about what can be achieved in a short space of time and how it brings prices down. Instead of attending to what the people want,
they haven't got any fracking gas out of the ground yet.
Exactly. And instead of actually...
That's not gun-ho.
If I can finish... If I can... Andrew, tax breaks, talking up the jobs, talking out how it's going to bring prices down, but also Tories polarising shale gas against women.
Let's move on to the countryside. Let's move on to the countryside. Ed Davey, on the issue of floods, I mean, Lib Dems, you administers in DEFRA for much of this Parliament. Do you take some responsibility for the havoc the floods wreaked last year?
This government's actually invested a huge amount in flood defences, and I don't think you can actually blame any government, whether it's a Labour government, a coalition government, a Liberal Democrat government, a Conservative government, for the effects of climate change. What we need to do is tackle climate change by going green, and we also need to adapt our lifestyles in this country and help some of the poorest countries in the world, because climate change is already happening. It caused the flooding, in my view, that you talked to. Obviously, the science will now analyse that in great detail, but the scientists do suggest that extreme weather events are much more common and much more damaging because of climate change, and therefore that's why we need to invest seriously in adapting our lives and our countries and our economy to climate change.
Why did you cut the funding?
Why did you cut the funding for flooding? If that's the case.
We in the last, Matt, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but in the last 5 years, I think we invested far more than last Labour government.
Ed, just to break that down.
Can I give you the figures, please, so you can then debate among yourselves? The National Audit Office, spending on maintenance had fallen by 6% in real terms in the 5 years of the coalition. Overall funding had fallen by 10% in real terms.
This is a classic case of talking the talk and not walking the walk.
Had to add the private sector funding.
Roger, there was a lot of evidence at the time suggesting that in fact it was green policies that caused the flooding, because what they wanted to do in the interests of the environment was to allow the floodplain there to revert to a natural state. As a result, there was far less dredging, and people who worked in the area, you can laugh all you want, but people who worked in the area and have known it for decades said it was the failure to dredge which caused that.
Well, that's a good point, isn't it, Caroline Flint? I mean, because the last Labour government almost had kind of ideological opposition to dredging. Baroness Young, Labour peer, head of the Environment Agency, said, I'd like to see limpet mines put on every pumping station. Exactly. Have you dropped that ideological opposition to dredging?
I don't think that's in our manifesto, that particular policy. But what we did do...
So you're in favour of dredging now?
Look, I think dredging has a purpose, but it's not necessarily suitable for every situation to avoid flooding.
But it was suitable for that situation.
And what I would say to Roger, and my own area in Doncaster did suffer by floods under the last Labour government.